Liminal spaces fascinate us because they sit between comfort and dread. They feel nostalgic, peaceful, eerie, and wrong, all at once. Well, maybe the deeper question is not just why we like them. Maybe the question is why we want to stay there. Before I ever knew there was a term for this, I think I already recognized the feeling. Empty school hallways after everyone has gone home, hotel corridors late at night, or the mall nearing closing time. These places didn't necessarily scare me in their new unoccupied state, but they now came with an eerie sensation I couldn't quite articulate. They were still familiar, but lacked those familiar sounds they once had. They were now quiet, but not completely empty. Almost as if the silence had been replaced with a memory that's not entirely my own. Liminal basically means being in a threshold, not fully in one place or another. So when it comes to people talking about liminal spaces, they're usually referring to places of transition. This could be a hallway, a stairwell, or even a waiting room. Places designed to be passed through, paused in, or even temporarily occupied. But online, this term has become more than just a way of describing these physical spaces. They have now become a way of describing the atmosphere itself. But what is actually happening in our minds when we look at these vacant places? Why does that atmosphere hit us so hard? John Cohen, creator of the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, coined the term kenopsia by combining the Greek words for emptiness and seeing to map out an emotion we all feel but didn't quite have a name for. And that is the core distinction. A liminal space is the physical place of transition. Kenopsia is the specific psychological glitch you experience when that place is emptied of its intended purpose. Anthropologist Marc Augier famously defined these as non-places. He argued that modern life is increasingly built on these transient zones, airports, hotels, superstores, that we pass through without ever occupying. In a non-place, the individual is contractually bound to the environment, but remains anonymous. We aren't expected to be anywhere, but we are expected to be in transit. This is why they feel so vacant. They were never designed to hold human presence, only human flow. Yes, I know, I'm not trying to turn this into a lecture, but they need context if the rest of this is gonna make any sense. Just hold your notes until much later, okay? So why is the internet drawn to looking at photos and videos of these empty places? We linger on them because they give us permission to pause. We spend so much of life having to move forward, solve problems, and make decisions. But an empty waiting room isn't asking you to become anything. It just logically holds on to the moment before the next thing happens. But the same pause is also why they feel slightly wrong. In environmental design, form follows function. A hallway is built specifically to direct human movement. This ties directly into what psychologist J.J. Gibson calls affordance theory. Everything in our environment offers us an affordance. A chair offers sitting. A hallway offers movement. Our brains are hardwired to scan a space for what we can do in it. When you strip away that human utility, you remove the affordance. The room feels like an emotional after image because the object is there, but the action is missing. It's familiar enough to recognize, but empty enough to make our brains misfire because the expected data is missing. So the reason why we enjoy the friction given by liminal spaces is because it's a form of controlled fear. Many images of liminal spaces gives us just enough information to recognize a place from our past, but not enough to explain why it feels eerie. When the external noise of a space is removed, we are essentially forced to project our own internal noise onto the blank canvas of the room. It is a direct encounter with the unconscious mind at work that makes these places also incredibly useful for any kind of creative practice. They give you raw materials, the fluorescent lighting, the old carpet, the heavy silence, that which you can pull as inspiration to develop ideas into stories, videos, or even new perspectives. No, I'm not talking about the Backrooms specifically, I'm talking about liminality in general, okay? Two different things. Stay with me. So have you ever found yourself in a liminal state of mind? Have you found yourself drawn to these places for a particular reason? Let me know in the comments. But there is a fine line. Escape into these liminal spaces is fine when it's how we rest, train our minds to handle discomfort or to process things. It becomes a problem when the escape turns into avoidance. Psychological studies on avoidance behavior shows that when we use external environments to detach from reality, we aren't actually resting. We are creating a cognitive buffer. If you spend too much time in these liminal mental states, you begin to lose the ability to navigate through the fixed spaces of your actual life. The problem is not that we linger, the problem is that when we stop using the space as a temporary pause and start using it as a place to hide. Liminal spaces are meant to be passed through, they are not places to live. And that is why the Backrooms is such a powerful piece of internet folklore. It takes that exact feeling and asks, what if you couldn't leave? You no-clip out of reality into an endless maze of buzzing lights and yellow wallpaper. The pause becomes permanent. It is a world built entirely from transition, but without a destination. Also, this is a perfect example of infinite recursion, a mathematical concept where a pattern repeats itself without an end. In the Backrooms, the horror isn't just a monster, it's the lack of an exit. It is the extreme, literal version of avoidance. What happens when the place you were only supposed to pass through becomes the whole world? I know. The irony is not lost on me, okay? Just give me a second. And that brings me back to the central tension I keep returning to. So maybe liminal spaces are not the problem. Maybe they're just mirrors into ourselves. They show us how beautiful nostalgia can be, how exciting dread can be, and how much of our imagination lives between memory and dream. So visit the spaces between spaces. Listen to the music that lives within it. But eventually, we're gonna have to find the exit. Because if we're not too careful, we might find ourselves lost in our own back rooms. How's that?